Hey, what's up, guys? Good to be back. It's been a while since I've been on YouTube with you. But tonight we're going to be in Genesis 13 through 19, and this is our second pass through the life of Abraham, and we're talking about the path and cost of spiritual compromise. Now, if you heard Shane last week, you heard that Abraham is this great man of faith. He's probably one of the top three most important people in the entire Bible. And we read in Genesis 15:6 that Abraham believed the Lord, and because of his belief, he was counted righteous because of his faith. So Abraham is this great man of faith. He's characterized by his faith. In fact, this verse, Genesis 5:16, is the most quoted, one of the most quoted verses from the Old Testament in the entire Bible. It's referred to again and again as really the prime example of how a person comes into a relationship with God. Not by works, but through faith, by choosing to believe in the promises of God. And we see Abraham's faith play out in a number of really cool ways. He left his home to go to a completely foreign land just because he was following the voice of God. He changed his belief system. He came from a polytheistic culture and changed his entire worldview to belief in a one creator God. I don't know if you've ever done that. Change something significant about your belief system. It's actually a big deal. To not just sliding into doubt about something and kind of apathetically not believing something the way that you used to, but I mean really weighing the evidence, considering whether or not something is true, and then changing your life based off of a new belief. That's something which I did when I was in high school. When I first came to a place where I decided to put my faith in God, it was a process. It was hard, and it radically changed the way that I lived. Definitely did the same thing for Abraham. He also trusted that God would do the impossible, that God would bring him a son and make him into a great nation. And through this, he ended up becoming the father of God's people. We'll talk about that more next week. And so this is a good start. This is a good way to begin your spiritual life. But the thing about good beginnings is that they don't guarantee that the road ahead will be smooth. Rocky times are going to come, and it's difficult to go the long haul with God. And so how does a person go the long haul with God without falling into spiritual compromise? That word compromise is a word that means different things in different situations. There's good compromise, like if you want to go to fast food and I want to go to a sit-down restaurant and we land on going to Chipotle, that's a good compromise. But there's also bad compromise. Like governments shouldn't compromise with terrorists, right? Or if there was someone, breaking into your home and threatening your family, you shouldn't compromise with that person. And so this kind of compromise that we're talking about, spiritual compromise, is the second kind. It's a dangerous type of compromise. It's the kind of compromise that changes who you are. In 1 John in the New Testament, we are warned about something called the world system. It's a system of values that is oriented against God and just pushes against the ways of God, and it is basically the way of the world that we live in, the ways of the world apart from God. And what John says about this is, do not love the world or anything in the world. For if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but it comes from the world. And so there is immense pressure out there for believers of all ages, Abraham all the way to us, to compromise our faith, to compromise our beliefs, and to become indistinguishable from the world around us. And that was true of Abraham in the environment that he was living in as well. If you're not ready for it, like an unseen force, like the wind or like a wave, it can just come and just knock you off your feet and make you look like a fool. And so that's what we're going to be tangling with as we talk about a character from the story of Abraham by the name of Lot. Lot was Abraham's nephew, and his story really is a cautionary tale about the dangers of spiritual compromise. We read that now Lot was moving about with Abram, who had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together. Quarreling arose between Abraham's herders and Lot's. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain, and he pitched his tents near Sodom. And so Abraham and Lot basically make this agreement when their people can't get along, that they're going to go their separate ways. And Lot goes to the land of Sodom. He moves away from Abraham, and he gets his family out on its own in this new city. And so what we're going to see here is that Although it's not clear right now what's going to come of this, this is the first step that Lot takes towards spiritual compromise and ultimately towards disaster. He gets isolated. He gets away from the spiritual community that he had through Abraham. And we can imagine the ways that Lot might have rationalized this decision. He might have been thinking like, hey, the city is where it's at, man. That's where the money is. There's good things there. I really like Sodom. Sodom's got a great waterfront scene. You know, the hummus restaurants there, they're incredible. I love the cuisine, right? So many cool experiences, so many beautiful things to see. He might have thought to himself like, yeah, you know, Abraham is the only other believer in God that I know right now, but I'm sure that I'll find good spiritual community in the city. I'm sure I'll find some people out there who more or less believe the same things, and we can be an encouragement to each other. I haven't gone and checked it out myself, but I'm sure there's good people there. He also just might have been thinking, you know, I need to do my own thing. I'm sick of Abraham. I've been living in his shadow. I got to get out and kind of do me for a while. Maybe I'll come back later, but I just got to do me right now. Well, the end result is that he ends up being totally alone in this environment where everybody is against God and against what he believes. Later in the Bible, we're warned about this. Proverbs 18:1 says, whoever isolates himself seeks out his own desire, and he breaks out against sound judgment. We're also told in Romans 12 that as believers, we are interconnected with one another, that we need one another. So in Christ, though many, we form one body, and each member belongs to the others, and therefore we should be devoted to one another in love. Hard to be devoted when we move far away from each other, when we no longer spend time with one another. What do we think is going to happen if we start acting as if we're not interconnected? Spiritually, bad things are soon to arise. Well, we read also that not only did they move far away, but apparently this was known, that the people of Sodom were wicked, and they were sinning greatly against the Lord. And so apparently this was something which Lot didn't take into account. Well, we read that, this is fast forwarding a bit, but we read that a little bit later on, the king of Sodom and other kings marched out and they drew up their battle lines in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and other kings as well. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell in them and the rest fled to the hills. The four kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and then they went away, and they also carried off Abraham's nephew Lot and his possessions. So this is the second thing that we see happen to Lot, is that he makes a bad bet. It started out with him getting isolated, choosing Sodom over life with Abraham and with these other people who were also believers in God. But choosing to live in the city was also a decision that he made, probably because he thought it would make him more secure. You see, ancient walled cities were like the safest possible places. You were protected from marauders. There was usually an organized army. There was ways of being protected from all the terrible things that were out there in the ancient world. And so Lot was probably thinking to himself, what's a better bet for my family's safety than money, high walls, and a powerful king? This is going to work out well for me. Well, it didn't. We see that Sodom was sacked and he was carried away. And Abraham actually has to go out and rescue Lot and his family and bring them back, and actually rescues the entire city of Sodom. David in the book of Psalms says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Later he says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. Who needs walls when you got God? He says he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you, his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. And so yes, walls, chariots, horses, these things can offer a measure of security, a measure of protection. But the ultimate protection, the ultimate security is found in the one who made these things. And so from a material standpoint, sure, it makes sense to bet on things like money and walls and power. But the one who knows God should bet on him first and foremost. Well, we're going further, even a little bit more down the road. We read that two angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. And when he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. So a little bit of context here. We skipped a few chapters, but what happens is God appears to Abraham and says, listen, I'm going to judge the city of Sodom. Much like, he judged the people during the days of Noah, because he says the outcry against their evil is exceeding. And what he means is that, that apparently this city was evil. They were oppressing the people around them. What they were doing was so wicked that God said, I'm just hearing the voices of many people calling out saying, God, why won't you intervene? Why won't you do something? And so he sends two angels who take on the form of men, and they arrive at Sodom in the evening because Abraham had actually asked God to intervene and try to rescue Lot and his family. And so we see that Lot was sitting in the gate of the city, and when he saw them, he got up to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. So this is something that if we didn't know about ancient Near Eastern culture, we might miss it. But this description carries a very important detail that helps us understand something else that Lot had done that took him further down the path of spiritual compromise and ultimately to disaster. And that's that Lot pursued power. You see, it says that he was sitting in the city gates. That's not where just homeless people were or something like that, but the men who sat in the city gates were the politicians of the city. They were the rulers of the city. And so apparently, Lot has been very successful in Sodom. He's become a powerful man with influence on the culture. But what we're going to see is that pursuing this power is part of what has just morphed his values and taken him far from where he was in his relationship with God. And again, who knows what he was thinking? Maybe he was thinking to himself, I can change the system, man. I can get on the inside and make this place different. Maybe he was thinking, I'm just different than these people. I'm not going to be corrupted by getting real into this. He's like, I really am. I'm different. I'm going to be able to hold on to my beliefs. Even though no one else here seems to be different, I'm going to be different. Man, that kind of pride can lead to a serious fall. We all know that there's certain things that if you dabble in them, you don't change them, they change you. Like if you dabble in dealing crack, you don't change the crack game. The crack game definitely changes you. Managing a TJ's is probably pretty similar to that. You don't change TJ's, right? TJ's is definitely going to change you. Basically the same thing. And so the point here is that Lot didn't appreciate the way that power and influence really has the ability to change people. James 4:4 says, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world, meaning this world system, makes himself an enemy of God. Yet these things are opposed to each other. We can't live by the values of the world and also live by the values of God. We can't play by the world's rules and also live by the way of God. These things are going to come into conflict. And so if a person wants popularity, power, extreme wealth, and pursues those things with their life, which is what the world has to offer, it's going to involve some level of moral compromise. And I wish I could say that this is something that was only true of people pursuing secular power in the world, but it's also true for Christians. The last few years, we've just been rocked by scandal after scandal after scandal of these celebrity Christians who have gone on to abuse women, to steal from their churches, and really bring shame to the name of God. And this is a direct result, I believe, of not appreciating the way that power, popularity, influence has the ability to corrupt people. There's something about when you can just do whatever you want because of your influence or because of your wealth, that just means that you then do whatever you want. It takes real accountability. It takes being in community. It takes so many different surrounding measures to keep us from abusing our power. And this is something which the humble person, the believer in God, needs to take so seriously, because we might look back and before we know it, realize, wow, I've really changed my morals. I've compromised my beliefs just to get these things that I wanted. And now I'm not even recognizable from the person that I was. Well, we read that he insisted so strongly to these men that they enter his house that they finally said yes, and he prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Well, that's the path to compromise. But everything from here on out, as we move through Genesis 19, is going to be the cost. And I'm just going to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of a trigger warning. This is one of the most savage stories in the entire Bible. I was actually talking to a friend just a couple weeks ago, and she was telling me that she tried to read the Old Testament at one point. She got all the way to Genesis 19. She got to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and at the end of it, she just closed the Bible and said, not for me. Just put it aside because of what she read here. And so this is really difficult stuff to read, but it should be sobering for us if we and also instructive if we understand the message. Well, we read that before they'd all gone to bed, the men from every part of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house, and they called out to Lot and said, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we may have sex with them." Yeah, a rape mob gathers in front of Lot's house and says, "Bring us your guests so we can rape them." Made of the young and the old. This was like a community event, like everyone turned out to Lot's house. Not a community festival, something very different was the center of activity in the city of Sodom. Well, Lot went out to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, no, my friends." And here's where you think, oh, maybe Lot's going to really show that he's not totally gone. He's a changed man, right? Well, he says, "Look, I have 2 daughters who've never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under protection of my roof." Oh my God. How could Lot have fallen so far to the point that his honor, because in the ancient Near East, your hospitality was directly connected to your honor, he viewed that so highly, his moral priority on protecting his reputation because of how he treated his male guests meant that it didn't matter at all what happened to his own daughters. Wow. You know what's the worst part about this? Is that Lot may not have really, even at this point, Lot may have not even been able to see what a real compromise, what a real just distortion of reality this really was. Because he had been immersed in this way of thinking for so long, he just completely had lost perspective. Well, the crowd doesn't take no for an answer. They say, "Get out of our way. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot, and they moved forward to break down the door. Well, skipping ahead, the 2 men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons and daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you, who is part of your family? Get them out of here, because we're going to destroy this place, because the outcry to the Lord against his people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws who were pledged to marry his daughters, but his sons-in-laws thought he was joking. Man, I wonder why. I wonder why they thought he was joking. You ever seen in a movie, you've got the kind of the deadbeat uncle or maybe the older brother who tries to give the younger sibling or the nephew a lecture on being responsible and being like a real upstanding citizen, like, you gotta be the man, right? Maybe that's kind of what it was like here. Because these guys, they'd seen Lot just live out the values of the city for so long, and now he's here trying to tell them, like, "Oh, dude, like we got, God is saying that we got to get out of here. We got to listen to God." And they're like, "Lot, listening to God? Like, when have you ever done that? We've never seen that. We never even hear you talk about God." I honestly wonder if this is how non-Christians feel when Christians, out of nowhere, try to talk to them about spiritual things. But they themselves, these Christians, they seem indistinguishable. They seem the same. They live exactly the way that people in the world do. So how can they be taken seriously? That's absolutely what happened in the case of Lot. Well, as soon as they had brought them out of the city, the angels take these men out of the city. They say, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." But we read that Lot's wife looked back longingly and she became a pillar of salt. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. We see that as they're running out of the city, we actually read earlier in the story that Lot hesitates multiple times. He's not sure if he wants to leave, despite the fact that the city is going to be destroyed. But the men just grab him by the hand. They're dragging him. It's him, his daughters, and his wife. But it says his wife looked back longingly. When she looked out at the city that was burning in the background, she identified more with the city, the murder and the rape of that city, and the wealth and the power and everything else that she'd had there, rather than the rescue of God, which had been presented to her. And so what does it mean that she became a pillar of salt? This could have been God, an act of judgment, literally turning her into a pillar of salt. I've wondered before if if it maybe is an idiom of some kind, meaning that she was actually burned by the sulfur that was falling from the sky. We don't know. But the point is that her longing to be, her choice to be identified with the city is ultimately what led to her perishing in this moment. Well, Lot and his daughters are saved. Now, I'm going to do us a favor here, and I'm not going to read the rest of Genesis 19 because what follows here will just make you sick to your stomach. But what happens is Lot's daughters are fearful after the rescue that because they don't have husbands, and in the ancient Near East, your value as a woman was connected to your ability to have children. And so they were so afraid of not having children that they actually get Lot completely drunk 2 nights in a row, blackout drunk, and they rape him. They have sex with him and get pregnant by their own father. I mean, it's hard to even fathom. It's so sick and it's so disturbing. Well, I think we need to take some time now just to process what we've heard. You might be listening to this and still kind of reeling, like, what? This is in the Bible? Like, what are we supposed to take from this? You know, and I'll admit, this story is a very extreme story. It's a very intense story. But it is true that the path towards compromise can be both slippery and also very steep. No one plans to end up at rock bottom. Nobody plans to do the worst things they've ever done. Lots of small decisions lead to the place where all of a sudden you look back and ask yourself, how did I get here? I've been following God long enough, and I've seen friends turn away from God, and I've seen friends who don't know God go directions in their lives they never thought they would. I've been that person in certain cases. And so the path towards compromise is slippery and steep, and that's one reason why we have to pay close attention to reality as God has made it. When we ignore reality, both physical reality and also spiritual reality, we tend to get burned. Have you ever taken your hand and just run it along like an old plank of wood against the grain, like the wrong direction? If you have, you've probably ended up with a handful of splinters. Well, when we rub our lives against the grain of the universe as God has made it, we also get splinters. It's just the natural course of things because there is such a thing as right and wrong. There is such a thing as design for how God has made human beings. And when we contradict that design, we throw that design out the window, we suffer damage as a result. But that's one reason why God, in his love and mercy, has revealed to us his word. He wants us to know the truth. He wants us to know what it means to live a full life following him and to avoid a lot of the damage that can happen to us in a sinful and broken world. And so it's worth taking the time to ask the question, am I on the path to compromise? Wouldn't it be great if Lot, had moved to Sodom, kind of gotten a lay of the land and been like, you know what? Not a good place for my family. I'm going to go back to be with Abraham. If we're aware that we are beginning to compromise, then we can turn things around before it's too late. And so here are some questions that a friend once posed to me and some others that I think are worth the rest of us taking some time to think about. Do your values shift when you are around different people? What you really care about, who you are, does that change circumstance to circumstance? If it does, that suggests that you're the kind of person who might compromise because you don't have a fixed sense of identity. You don't live with a fixed sense of truth or what is right or what is wrong. You're just adapting to please the people around you. Whose opinion really matters most to you? Is it God's or is it just the people around you? Is it the people you're currently trying to impress? Have you ever changed your morals in order to fit in? Has there ever been something that you would have said like, no, I'll never do that. I'll never go that far. But then in order to fit in order to be accepted, you've changed things. That's the path to compromise. This last question is a little bit of a difficult one, but it's really important. What is the guiding principle of your life? What I mean by that is, how do you make your most important decisions? What are the non-negotiables of your life, the things that matter more than anything else? If it's your relationship with God, if it's doing what's right, then that's something which should give you a system for knowing what is right to do and what decisions are worth making. What decisions line up with the kind of person that I want to be, with the kind of life that I want to live? If we're clear on those things, then we're going to be able to navigate some of the most difficult situations in our lives without making disastrous or wrong decisions. And so let's just think of some keys here to not compromising, looking back at the story of Lot. One thing we definitely need to do is we need to reject the world system. And when I say the world system, again, I mean the system of values. I don't mean the people in the world. I don't mean that we should reject people who don't know God or judge people who don't live the same way that we do. What I mean is that we should reject the values of the world system. That we should be able to look out at the world just chasing material things. That we should look at the advertisements that tell us that if we can just have X experience, we'll be happy. If we look out at the people in the world who don't care anything about spirituality or about a relationship with God, we should be able to look out at that and say, that's not for me. That's not what I want. I know that that's not right. That's not going to lead me to a place that I want to go. And so we need to develop a critique of the way that the world is. We can't just buy whatever's fed to us through our Instagram feeds. We need to be able to look to what God says and weigh it against what the messages the world is sending us and say, which one of these is true? We got to make the right bets. Now, we shouldn't overreact either. Christians often get dinged for being weird because they choose to be different in the wrong areas. They dress different. They just try to look different, talk different, and we look bizarre. We should be indistinguishable from people in areas that don't matter, like how we dress, how we talk to people, etc., the kind of music that we listen to. The ways that we should be different are in the areas that are most important: morality, relationships, priorities. Are your priorities, relationships, and morals distinguishably different from people in the world? They should be. They should be if we really have a real relationship with God. Of course, in order to know what's right and wrong, we got to know God's word. This is the way that we know what it means to compromise. Man, reading through the Proverbs, knowing the wisdom of God, this can help us, again, navigate the most difficult decisions in life and avoid making these decisions that are going to lead us in that direction. And then finally, going all the way back to the beginning of Lot's life, when he first chose to get isolated because of a conflict with Abraham, we need to prioritize spiritual relationships. If you have these, you can't let them go easily. Part of what corrupted Lot was that he was trying to do it by himself. And if we try to go without community, again, we actually are going against God's design for spirituality. So we need to prioritize spiritual relationships. We need to be in community. We need to love people and grow close to one another because we can help each other maintain a life with God through the long haul. Well, one final thing for us to consider as we wrap this up, and really, this is one of the most shocking parts of the whole story, is that despite everything that Lot did, despite everything that happened, God still considered Lot to be a part of his family. In one of Peter's letters to the church in the New Testament, Peter says that Lot was a righteous man. Now, you hear that, and that kind of, you're like, okay, no guy who ever did something like that with his daughter should ever be considered a righteous man. Well, you have to understand the Bible's definition of righteousness. To be righteous means to be perfect. To be righteous means to be right in the sight of God. And the reality is that no person is righteous because of their own merits. No person is considered right before God because of all the good things that they've done. No, to be right before God requires something else. It actually requires an act of God. And so in the case of Lot, we see at minimum, Lot was a part of Abraham's family, but also Lot believed God and allowed himself to be rescued. And even though his life was in many ways destroyed, he still chose to believe in God, and therefore God viewed him as righteous. It's not that he protected him from the consequences of his bad decisions, but ultimately Lot is saved by God because he was willing to believe in God for his salvation, to be saved. And while it's easy to judge a guy like Lot, we should all be encouraged by that, because if Lot can be saved, that means that you and I can be saved too. If Lot can be considered righteous, then you and I can be considered righteous too. Because no matter what we've done is not the basis on which we can approach God. We can approach God because God sent his son to die on the cross. He paid for our sins. And he says the only thing that we need to do to be made right with him is to believe in what he's done for us. And so God provided rescue for Lot. Lot believed in that rescue. God has provided rescue for you. God has provided rescue for me. And we should believe in God's rescue. And if we are willing to do that, then we too can be considered a part of God's family. Anyway, that's all we have for tonight, but thank you so much for tuning in. I've got some discussion questions here for you to consider. Talk about if you're in a small group of some people. And for the rest of you, come into CT next week. I'll see you then.